And now, marine weather around Alaska.
First up, tonight's weather. Next system pushing in across the Bering Sea now, bringing wind and rain into the Pribilof Islands, swinging into the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, especially after midnight. Otherwise, I've got another low tracking northward here toward Prince William Sound again. That's going to bring an increase in the rain and snow into the North Gulf Coast, mainly again, southern Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound eastward there to about Yakutat, and increasing chances of rain or snow into the southeast interior, northern Cook Inlet, Madawaska-Susitna Valley. Tomorrow, that low tracks northward there, and precipitation starts to taper off, and then behind it stays wet for the eastern North Gulf Coast, northern Panhandle, lighter rainfall amounts down to the south. And this front, new low tracking up to off the coast there, front kind of rotates right into the Bristol Bay area, Alaska Peninsula, wind, rain, and snow with that. That extends back up into towards St. Lawrence Island, gusty west winds, colder temperatures, rain and snow showers for the Aleutians. Then we have a pretty good low off the Yukon Delta coast on Monday with a pretty tight gradient there, and colder air wrapping in around that, so snow over the Yukon Delta, rain and snow, Kuskokwim Delta, rain and snow showers, Bristol Bay, all the way out across the central Aleutians, and some snow with this front as it rolls into the south central Alaska area back to the northwest, and just some showers for the Panhandle. Coastal water forecasts. Small craft advisories for the southern coast here, 25 to 30 knot winds out of the southeast. And gale warnings for the central coast, southeast winds 35 knots, and east-southeast 25 to 35 knot winds for the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds 25 to 40 knots tomorrow. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 25 to 40 knots, and southeast winds 25 knots for Clarence Strait. And for Monday, west winds 15 knots for the south coast. Small craft advisories here on the central coast for south winds at 25 knots. And west to south winds at 20 knots with seas around 10 feet for the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Stevens Passage, south at 15 knots. Clarence Strait, southeast at 20 with seas at about 6 feet. Prince William Sound, gale warnings tomorrow for Sunday gale warnings. East winds 35 knots, seas 9 feet, and southeast winds 30 to 40 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. West winds 25 knots for the western coast. South at 20 for the Barrett Islands, variable 20 for Kamishak Bay and Cook Inlet. North winds 10 to 15 knots with 2-foot seas. And for Monday, Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, southwest winds 25 knots with 6 to 8-foot seas. Southwest 25 here for Kamishak Bay and the Barrett Islands. Prince William Sound, southwest at 25, seas 6 feet, and gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast. Southwest winds 35 knots with 11-foot seas. Kodiak Island, south to southwesterlies at 25 knots for the day Sunday. Southeast winds 30 knots here, but seas only 3 feet for Bristol Bay. And gale warnings here for the Alaska Peninsula. South winds 35 knots with 12 to 13-foot seas. And for Monday, Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisory, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Southwest 30-knot winds with 11-foot seas now for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, south winds 25 to 30 knots with 7 to 10-foot seas. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, west winds 35 to 40 knots. Central Aleutians, west winds 35 knots. Gale warnings also for the western Aleutians, west winds at 40 knots with 18 to 22-foot seas. And for Monday, coming down, but still westerly, but small craft advisories now, 30-knot winds west of Adak and Atka specifically, west of 25, and the eastern Aleutians west-southwest, 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast, southern Nunivak Island, there's a gale warning out for Sunday. Southeast winds 35 knots, 7-foot seas. Storm warnings for the Pribilofs here. South winds 50 knots, seas 17 feet. Good gales for St. Matthew Island, southeast at 40 knots with 15-foot seas. Yukon Delta coast and St. Lawrence Island, east winds 30 knots. And then for the day on Monday, low center tracking northward here, so south winds 25 to 30 knots there for the Yukon Delta coast into St. Lawrence Island, south 25 for Norton Sound. Kuskokwim Delta Coast, Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, all looking at southwest winds at 30 knots with 10 to 17 foot seas. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, light winds, east at 10 tomorrow, east 15 for the central and western Arctic coast. Chukchi Sea, east winds 20 to 25 knots. And for Monday, the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, east winds 15 knots for the western Arctic coast, central and east side here, variable to east winds only at 10 knots.